guys, Quick Draw McGraw here, and this is going to be a different type of episode for us, and this is going to be a history lesson. I am a huge fan of history, and when I was getting into comic books, and I've been getting into art, as we have seen, I really wanted to understand what was the first comic book ever, right? So I'm going to go into this in more detail throughout the episode that we have here. But basically, you're looking at right here, this is the first comic book that was ever made. And it was actually written in French. And it was done in Switzerland. And the author was Rudolf Töpffer. And he eventually sent this comic book to the United States, and it was translated into English, and this is what it looks like here. So it's called The Adventures of Mr. Obadiah Oldbuck, and it is hilarious. So it is not a superhero book, or like we have today with Superman, Batman, or whatever. It's basically a comedy love story, and it is hilarious. And the way it works, that you'll see when I kind of go through this, but it's written like that's the book is like this size, and then you open it up, it kind of goes like that. But you can go online and you can actually get the book like in this size. So it's like our comic book normal size. And so it just kind of opens up and tells a little bit about the story, and then it begins the whole story about Mr. Obadiah Oldbuck, and his love affair with this lady that he's trying to gain the attention and love of. So it is a wonderful, funny little story, very quick and easy to read. But this, as I'll talk about later throughout the video, is the precursor to The Yellow Kid, which people think that that's the first comic book that's ever out there, and it's not. It's actually this. Well, it was the original version of this in French, and then this is the English one, which you can see if you can download or get a copy of in our format that we're used to reading in comic books. Then it was Yellow Kid, and then the first actual superhero was the Phantom. And these are all before Superman. So everybody thinks Superman is like the first superhero comic book, whatever, but it's actually not true. So if you have a love of history, if you have a love of comic books, if you want to know where comic books started, I highly recommend that you grab this. In the video, I'm actually going to go page by page by page. So you can literally read the entire book from my video. It's not copyrighted, whatever. It's out there. It's in museum archives and everything else. I basically just took all the pages for you, and so you can actually read through it, along with commentary and some background information and how it fits into modern day and everything else. So I hope you enjoy this session or episode, whatever. Again, like, subscribe, give me comments. Let me know if this is useful, something that you like. I love history, and I can do more research into history for you of comic books. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to me, and we're going to walk through this book. Thanks, guys. All right. So this is a book that most Americans know as The Adventures of Mr. Obadiah Oldbuck, which began its life in Switzerland as History des Vieux Bois. I don't speak French, but that's what it is called. And it was created by Rudolf Töpffer. And so Töpffer created the story of Mr. Obadiah Oldbuck in the 1830s, and he published it in Europe before comics as we know them even existed. And so unlike illustrated novels or political cartoons of the era, Töpffer told the story through a sequence of pictures linked together by captions. And so characters moved scene to scene and actions unfolded visually, and the reader followed a continuous narrative. So in 1842, the story was translated and published in New York as The Adventures of Mr. Obadiah Oldbuck. And so that American edition, which you're looking at right now, is widely regarded as the first comic book published in the United States. And so, although Töpffer never lived to see superheroes or newspaper strips or graphic novels or manga or comic book shops, nearly every form of comics storytelling really traces its part of its ancestry back to these methods that he pioneered. And so, like we like to talk about on this show, this comic book is at its heart really, it's not an adventure story, it's really a love story. And it's a story about obsessive romantic pursuit. And so Obadiah Oldbuck, he falls deeply in love with a young woman, as you're seeing here, and she is the object of his affection and later becomes the center of his world. And instead of moving on when obstacles arise, he becomes consumed by winning her hand. And so the story follows like his repeated efforts to reach her, communicate with her, and overcome the barriers that separate the two of them. And so what makes this book, incredibly funny is that nearly everything goes wrong with this guy. I mean, he is rejected, he is embarrassed, he is chased, he's injured, he's captured, he is humiliated, he is misunderstood. And the thing about him is that he is persistent, and he never quits. And so the book, really repeatedly asks the question of, how much like ridiculous suffering will a man endure for love? And Töpffer, he answers that question with escalating absurdity. And so, why was this romance different, right, than modern ones? And modern romance stories, they often focus on whether two people are truly belong together, and Töpffer's story is different. And this comedy comes from Obadiah's persistence. So the woman is often less developed than Obadiah himself, and the story is really about watching this eccentric man repeatedly throw himself into disaster because he cannot stop pursuing his romantic ideal. And so in many ways, Obadiah is the ancestor of Charlie Brown chasing the impossible dreams, silent film romantics, comic book strip losers who basically never give up, and romantic comedy protagonists whose plans just consistently and constantly backfire. So, why do comic historians really care about this book? So, they don't really celebrate Obadiah Oldbuck because it was like the greatest plot that was ever written in the history of comics. They really celebrate it because it proved that pictures could carry a long narrative. And so the book, it introduces ideas that later became standard comic storytelling. So basically sequential visual narratives, there's recurring characters, there is visual comedy, there is panel-to-panel action that's occurring, there's character-driven humor, there's long-form graphic storytelling. And so basically, without Töpffer, the path to the Yellow Kid, which is some regard as the first comic book, but not really, but it's the second comic book in the United States, and then the Phantom, which is the first superhero comic book character, and then Superman, who everybody thinks that that's the first superhero character, but it's actually not. He's after the Phantom. And if it wasn't for this book and for Obadiah Oldbuck, all of this those three would have looked very different, and comics would look very different. And so, I think the synopsis of this is, I would really kind of frame it as, in 1842, decades before superheroes and before comic books and before newspaper strips and, America, they published this strange little book called The Adventures of Mr. Obadiah Oldbuck, and based on a book written in French from Töpffer that came over from Switzerland. And the book was not about saving the world. It was not about fighting villains, and it was really about a man who was hopelessly in love, and he spends basically the entire story, as you can tell here, chasing and romance, and he suffers from one disaster after another, and he just refuses to give up. And so this simple love story here became really one of the foundations of the comic book medium and itself. And basically every superhero comic and graphic novel and newspaper strip that followed this really owes something to the storytelling experiments of Rudolf Töpffer and his unlucky romantic hero Obadiah Oldbuck. So I hope you all have enjoyed this little walkthrough of Obadiah, and I found it to be very interesting. So like, subscribe, comment if you found this to be useful and enjoyable. All right, thanks a lot.